Good morning. It's very early, not super early, but I just um, had a most wonderful experience. I'm finding I really like delving into these people's lives. Some are known as saints, most of them are. Even Gracian, I guess he is in the canonization process somewhere along the line. We probably have no idea how many people are in that other people have put into the canonization process, have submitted their $600,000 in order to get their names, but they're saints to me anyway. We shouldn't care about that, but we do, I guess, or some people do. Um, anyway, but it's um, important, I think, to try to put their lives into our context of living. That seems to be what matters. Gracian, there's so much about his life that I didn't describe really that well. Um, he was just such a kind person, loving person. And despite hardships, even when he was imprisoned the two times, he did all he could to help other people in prison and kept his attitude so positive. And I like how Teresa and Gracian, that they, excuse me, I have terrible, my hands are numb and neck, everything hurts so badly that I have to get this heat pack on my muscles because my hands just get burning and numb. I can't use them. Um, Usually in the morning it happens. Not complaining, just one of those things. But Gracian had such a lovely childhood. He studied so hard. He worked hard to be a good person and to love God and to get himself in a position where he could actually do a lot of good for the church. But all that got thrown out. Well, not all thrown out, but it seemed that way when people turned on him later in life. Well, he was still a young man when they turned. When Teresa died in 1582. After that, Gracian's life was made miserable by other people, by other religious, just as John of the Cross's life, because they dared to want to live God, to live the way, the truth, and the life. They didn't go along with the created system by other people of religious life. And I had a situation yesterday after I did the video yesterday, in which I talked a little bit more about Teresa and Gracian, Jeronimo Gracian, and how the rest of his life went. At the very end, it became more lovely again. He got out of prison. For a second time, he got out of prison after suffering a lot of mistreatment himself. But he tried to help the other prisoners, to love God and to treat each other well. Like I mentioned, that he would get a hold of money from other Christians who would visit him in prison, and he would actually pay some of the criminal prisoners gave them money if they wouldn't do terrible things. Cut off other prisoners' noses, cut off their ears. It was barbaric. Well, it still is today. Other prisoners are being raped by men raping men, women raping women, beating them up, injuring them, making their lives terrible. Prisoner on prisoner violence. But Gracian did all he could to evangelize Christ, to be loved, to be Christ to others. In prison, he was in with regular prisoners, even though he had done nothing but follow Christ. That was the sum of it. And he was in prison because religious people resented him and his goodness, and how he was helping with the reform. Even after Teresa died, he continued, and that was what people didn't like. They didn't want things to be more holy. But I was, after doing the video yesterday, I was thinking about Gracian. Somehow I had this deep love and appreciation for this man who had done so much good helping Teresa and helping others. And then he got turned on and was stuck away in prisons for a great deal of time. Finally got out. He lived a semi-hermit life the last three or 4 years of his life. He was able to get to Belgium, and he lived near a monastery or in connection with one as a hermit. He escaped, and he led a hidden life for his own safety and to have some peace. He wanted to have some peace, to continue doing writing and to help other people's writings get published. And he worked very hard at getting Teresa of Avila, her name cleared for daring to do this, what we today consider a great reform. But at the time, it wasn't so appreciated. So Gracian did a great deal to get Teresa of Avila recognized for her good. That was the kind of human love, decency that Gracian had toward Teresa, that he sacrificed a lot of his time in the later years, getting her works published. And then what time he had left, he wrote and got his things published. So, what wonderful people, selfless people, despite how they were mistreated. But look at all the good they did. In their lives, they did tremendous amount. And afterwards, even to this day, Gracian, not as much, because he promoted Teresa's writings. And so he's just now coming into more prominence with some of his own writings being published. Still just in Spanish, though. I looked up to see if I could get some of his writings, and I don't know Spanish. So hopefully someday other people will get it in English if they don't speak Spanish. But I was outside. I started getting this mudding process on this metal lath on the front of the house so that I can put stonework up. So I was mixing the mortar bit by bit and started putting this mud on this vertical surface. And it kept flopping out and stuff. And then I also, though, prior had been trying to get my sprinkler water to come on. I couldn't get the mechanisms to turn on, and I called the company that had done a lot of work on putting a new pipe into my house. I'd had a pipe break, a leak, year and a half ago, and it cost close to $8,000 all told. Terrible. But that was far less than what other companies were charging me. $13,000 and $11,000. So I took the $8,000. But I called these people, and they had me send pictures. Well, I never heard back, so it was getting to be maybe 4:30. I called again, and a different man answered. And he gave me his personal email to send the photos to. And he says, I'll just stay on the line to make sure I get the photos. Because I was trying to explain to them what I needed help with to get this water turned on. I couldn't. And so he then carefully explained to me what I needed to do. And it was a different location also to turn on. That I needed a long tool that I could, put on these valves down there to turn them. And a smaller one had to be kept shut, and the other one had to be turned on. Well, I couldn't get the other one to turn on. He wasn't sure what tool I had, if I had the proper tool. And he says, I'll tell you what, I'll come by, I'll close up shop here, and I live in your direction. And it's a big area where I live, so my direction, he could be off 5 miles easily from where he was going. But he says, I'm going to stop by your house and show you how to do this and check to see if you have the right tool. Well, he came about a half hour later. But while he was coming, I was thinking of Teresa and Gracian and John of the Cross. And the three of them, and all they did to try just to have the freedom and to help other people like us have the freedom to live our lives as religious people, spiritual people, in a church, to belong to the church, even though they were pretty much ousted themselves, being put in prison, and Teresa forced into retirement, into one place where she had to stay, where they thought it would be the rest of her life. Well, it was all but the last 2 years of her life, or 2.5 years. But very mistreated people who were doing such good. And part of the mistreatment was because they had done good and they had become popular and beloved of many people. And the other people in power didn't like it. The other priests didn't like it. The other nuns didn't like it. The bishops, they get involved. It comes down to politics, power, prestige, money, possessions. It comes down to all of those temporal things with seems like a lot of people when someone's trying to do good. But I was thinking as I was doing some mudding, waiting for this man to come, about Teresa and John and Jeronimo, the three of them, with Jeronimo being the youngest. And John was, I think, maybe 17 years younger than Teresa. She was the eldest. But how they worked together to keep going and to make this happen, this reform happen. And how the purpose was, because people in society had dragged the church down, and the ideals of Christ weren't being lived. That they decided their purpose and their goal, Teresa had decided this would be for the reparation of all our sins, of everybody's sins, including the women who drove her out late at night from where she lived, where her father had paid money so she could live a good life in a convent. They drove her out. I think they even had torches and things. They were going to burn her. They were furious women. And so I thought about that, making reparation. And I thought, this man coming out of his way after work to help me for nothing. Because if I'd had to call some they would have charged me $100 or $150 just to do a service call. And he came, and I thought, he's doing reparation for like the man who turned off my sprinklers last fall, who also I had hired when I couldn't get up with my bad knee, to make sure my sprinklers were all working, because I had just done a lot of landscaping. And I lost like $1,500 worth of landscaping because this man who I'd hired, a sprinkler man, hadn't really checked. And my little specimen conifers weren't getting water. And I had several deaths. And it was terrible. I called him back. He came again and said, well, you have a leak here or there. And he overcharged me for that. And then as it turns out, he turned this spigot off so tight that I couldn't have gotten it open. It took this man to do it. But I told this man, I said, I want to learn how to flush out my own sprinklers in the fall, because this other man overcharged me. He took advantage. And he also didn't do what I paid him to do, to make sure the sprinklers were working right, so that my newly landscaped yard that I worked so hard on, trying to build up strength before the knee surgery, because I was out of strength because my thyroid had gone out the year before. So I was, trying to do the landscaping as a means of building up some strength. And it needed to get done. I wanted to make the yard look beautiful for whoever's going to live here next. So I told this man, I said, I've been just, thinking about these people who lived in the couple of people who were very holy, or three people who lived in the 16th century, and how they made many changes but were imprisoned and mistreated for daring to live holy lives and to go against the norm because they wanted to live as Christ lived. And I was telling them about it, and I said they did it because they wanted to make reparation for other people's sins. So I said, I've been here while you were coming, thinking about you and how kind you are to do this. He seemed like maybe he was 29, but he was more like 40 as it turned out. So young looking and wonderful young man. And he said, he says, this is funny. He says, I was talking to my wife on the way here because I'm supposed to meet her where our daughter is playing basketball. And he says, I was telling her I was going to go help this lady get her spigot turned on because I wasn't able to. It was stuck. And he wasn't sure that I was even doing the right one and all. Turned out he had directed me well. I just didn't have the best tool for it. And I wouldn't have had the strength. He said it was stuck on very tight. My sprinkler man had closed it very, very tight, which he didn't do intentionally, of course, but the other stuff he had mucked up on. So, and I usually fix my own sprinklers, but he charged me for even just to fix one sprinkler, $159 last summer, which was robbery, really. It was a lot of money. I realize they're in business, but it was overkill. So he says, I was telling my wife that I was going to help this woman and that it was sort of like building up my good with God by doing something kind for someone else, passing it on. And he says, it's funny that you should be talking about the same thing. Well, it's God. But it was a coincidence that he was so aware of the very thing that I was thinking of as a result of spending a little more time to read about Gracian's life and to love him myself. I thought, I'm like Teresa. I love this Gracian. His personality comes through. And I have thought lately, since I'm old now and so much suffering, like my legs when I woke up an hour or two ago, just the pain, I do call out to God in the pain. It's horrific. And my hands and not being able to use them and the pain and burning in them right now. Even though I said, I'm not going to complain. But when you wake up in pain, you just call out. And I was in tears with the pain. And at times I can think back and think, I was blessed with such a lovely childhood. Yes, my parents maybe weren't soulmates or whatever. They worked well together. They stuck it out. And they provided well for us. My mother, with her temper, she stopped at nothing for her daughters, doing whatever it was that would help us in life, with experiences, education, trips, whatever. And that was part of the reason she worked also, was to help provide. And my dad was insistent that he was paying for our college because he didn't get to go to college. He had a scholarship, but he needed money to get there, $50, which was a lot back then in the Depression time, toward the end of Depression, but still. And this wealthy man, his best friend's grandfather, would not lend him $50 to get to college, where he had a scholarship to go to Hanover College back in the Midwest. So he never went to college. And he was determined. That's in part why he took this traveling job, to make more money. He was going to provide for his children. And people's sacrifices for what was important, for what they missed out in life, that they wanted their offspring to have. And in Teresa and John's and Jeronimo's, their way was to provide freedom of religious study and life for us that they didn't have, that wasn't going on in their time period. And they suffered a great deal for it. But here was Gracian, who was so kindly and so good. Even when he was imprisoned, he was evangelizing others and stopping people from getting their ears cut off and their noses cut off, and preaching to them. And his beautiful personality, his love for other prisoners, these criminals he was tossed in with, he treated them with love and made friends of them and brought them around to bettering themselves, even though they were in prison longer than him and for very different reasons than him. He was a political prisoner, basically, a religious political prisoner by his own fellow Christians, fellow Catholics. And here was this man from this big plumbing company in a neighboring city who, on his way home, was stopping to help me. And it was stuck. He got it open. He showed me this better tool that I need to buy that can turn it on and off. It's a very long-handled thing, because you stick it down in this deep pipe where they have these two valves secured down there, deep under the ground, so that they won't freeze in the cold weather. But and it was just a moment of grace that he had just been talking about the same thing to his wife as the reason he was stopping to help me. He'd be a little late, he told her, because he was paying it forward in a way. And he said to me, I hope that by now in my life I've made atonement enough for my sins that now I can do for others, make atonement for others. And that's exactly what Teresa and John of the Cross and Jeronimo Gracian did through their sufferings. And I'm reminded again of Teresa of Avila and these travels that she took and the hard work. She physically would help fix up these houses so that these women could live in them. The one that this patron bought her, and the woman did help pay for supplies, but Teresa and a couple other women went in there and did a lot of the work themselves to make it habitable. They lived in harsh, rough conditions, but they embraced that. And it was in one of her last journeys. And she was on her way back to Alba de Tormes, which was her last convent that she had started in the year before, 1581. She was stricken ill, probably a stroke or something, and then she died within the year. But what a hard life in all kinds of weather. She would travel by donkey, and one time the donkey threw her off into mud, bucked, and she dropped down into mud. Her habit, they didn't have washing machines, and she would travel, and they would stay out on the road overnight. Just sleep out or find some shelter that they could stay in, cold. And so there she was, all muddy and wet. And she exclaimed to God, if this is how you treat your friends, I can't think as to how you'd treat your enemies. She said that to God. She was very outspoken. She was so familiar with God. He was so close with her that she spoke to him as she would a husband. You know, if that happened, that a husband hadn't taken care and she had fallen or hadn't provided well enough for her and she'd gotten wet and muddy, she might have said that to her husband. You know, if this is how you treat your wife, you know, goodness sakes, how you treat friends, so, or others. So, interesting people. And I think the point of even knowing about these people is so we can apply it to our own lives. That's the point. And I really thought that my love of Gracian, I think he was pleased. I'm convinced he touched this man's heart and the God in him, because Gracian is pure love. He was nearly pure love on earth, it sounds like. Maybe he was pure love already on earth. Teresa thought so, the most amazing soul she'd ever met. And I think he touched this man to come and help me get my sprinklers on. It's getting so dry, I'm going to start losing landscaping if I didn't get my sprinklers going. So, how kind. And there he was, making reparation, he said. Didn't use that word, but the same effect. He was doing something good to make the world a better place. And I said, well, I think you've made reparation. You've made atonement for the sprinkler man who got it too tight when he turned it off. So, and also took advantage financially of me and didn't do what he was asked to do, just to go around and make sure all the sprinklers were working. And he didn't. He missed like 3 of them. So I had all that. And it isn't just the money, these were unusual, rare, beautiful plants, trees, little conifers, little evergreens, little shrubs. They wouldn't get large, but they were special. And it takes years for horticulturalists to develop these certain plants. One of them was called Eugene. And that was this dear uncle's name. And I had dedicated it to him and his wife. Planted it and dedicated it. And it was like a chartreuse yellow. And it stayed that way year round. Well, it didn't make it even through the first winter living here, because that man hadn't done his job, but charged me. I was in bed with my knee failure surgery, which was very disappointing. If you've gone through a knee replacement, and to think that it would fail and they can't do anything about it. So we take these sufferings, and they are nothing compared to the good of a positive attitude, of a love of God that extends to other people. And this young man, I thanked him profusely, but I want to do something more for him. To pay it forward myself, or for someone else. Well, God will give me opportunities, I'm sure. But I'm convinced it was because I thought so much and cared so much about Gracian and what he'd gone through, and related with him, because my young life was good until age 33, when it all changed. Well, even before with my husband as he was, but I loved him. I was willing to stay married, but when he became too terrible for the children, that was when I drew the line. But he didn't want to stay married anyway. He was not coming back. He he had already left. So there was no salvaging. He would tease with it now and then, but just for sex was what he wanted. He was very, very driven, egotistically like that. The more women, and it gave him a sense of power. That time that he raped me, after he'd already left and the divorce was already on its way. So, um, just life, and people, the good people and the very bad people. We're in a war. We're in a war zone. And we are, even within the church is still divided between those who want the deep spiritual realities and those who want a social time and it to be easy. And if we just show up for communion, that's all it takes. We're okay. We can do whatever we want as long as we have communion. No, there's more. There's so much more to God and to living the life Jesus teaches us in Scripture and by His life. So that's what I've been thinking about and wanted to share. Maybe the point of these videos and of talking about saints at all. People wanted stories about saints, but maybe not so much. Not unless they have some kind of fantastic stuff with them. Maybe they don't want to hear about the crud they went through by fellow Christians, the ugliness, because we know we've experienced it ourselves, some of us, the ugliness that can happen within a church, within a congregation even, not just Catholic, it can be with any group. Unless we get plugged in with all three prongs to the socket of God's power and might and are living it, trying to live it as best as we imperfectly do. We keep trying. God bless His real presence in us and love these people. They're our friends. They're helping us still. Gracian is still the same loving, beautiful soul. He worked a miracle for me. He did a great favor with this man called Jeff here in 500 years later, about. Well, not quite. It's getting there, though. 450 years later it is, since Gracian and Teresa and John were on earth. Have a beautiful day.